Hate is an uncomfortable topic, but hate needs to be discussed. It is one thing to claim you love diversity, but something else to say you hate anyone who has misgivings about the direction society is headed. It is hypocritical to demand tolerance and then threaten to kill or imprison anyone who is not tolerant. It is hypocritical to claim to support the very thing you are trying to destroy in others. This is not just evidence you are a hypocritical bigot, it is evidence what you are trying to promote is idiotic and quite likely evil. What are you after if one kind of diversity is not permitted and only your special kind of hate is given license to operate without restraint? Perhaps it is too much to expect you to realize diversity and hate are subjective and that you are not God. Even when Ishmael understands there is nothing about Jews that inherently justifies hate, there are still people who have a hard time understanding. There is nothing about being a Jew that makes you more worthy of love. Diversity is not good or bad, it is just the condition imposed on humans. And indeed, if you see diversity, you probably are discriminating against people and groups. If you mentally divide people into groups based on visible factors, you are no doubt a racist. But in this world, equality has no traction. Hate is the food governments feed off of. A few groups are identified as victims and others as their oppressors. The victim group is deemed worthy of protections not extended to similar but different groups, let alone the oppressor group. Why is stomping on a pride flag considered a hate crime but rape or beatings are not? Why is a comment about illegal migration considered a hate crime but burning a church not? Does the rape victim or Christian feel more loved than the gay or migrant communities after an attack? Is it not unreasonable to ask whether choosing to call an act done to one community a hate crime while denying the same act is a hate crime when done in reverse, is not in itself a hate crime? How do transgender persons claim opposition to them is due to hate, while claiming they have no animus against girls? Why is it a hate crime for girls to demand a safe space from biological males but not a hate crime for biological males to demand the end of spaces that only biological females can use? If what you do causes trauma in others, and you insist on your right to do it, how is what you are doing not a hate crime? How do we even adjust for bias in hate crime policy? What would a hate crime look like to a Nazi? What would a Quaker consider to be a hate crime? Could the two groups agree, and if not, there is nothing objective about hate crime policy? Is there an experiment or test that governments apply to determine if the activity is a hate crime? Is there a feature that can be identified and measured that accompanies every hate crime? Is it wrong to hate evil and love good? We are basically being trained to hate without being made aware of what the difference is between good and bad hate. Hate is not wrong, but there is a wrong kind of hate. Anti-Semitism is considered a hate crime because there is no reason to hate a people or group. The idea is that hate has to be directed against a person, or perhaps not even a person, but particular behaviors. We are told to hate the sin but not the sinner, as if they can be separated. But if we do not hate communists and Nazis, we are considered flawed, at least those who hate these people. Pedophiles and abusers are groups we are required to hate, though this is changing. Pedophilia is being normalized both for children and lawmakers. There are other groups that appear to lack protections, including Trump supporters, misogynists, and people who do not wish to fund the social safety net. In a world where distinctions become sharper and the divisions grow ever deeper, it is difficult to talk about hate without talking about politics. Hate is becoming more about your opposition to a political agenda than morality. A hate crime has more to do with using law to eliminate the political opposition than about creating a safe state. Can a hate crime reflect one political agenda and oppose another, and not be a political ploy? If hate is tied up in our politics, why not just make it a hate crime to oppose the left and its political agenda? Demonize everyone who is not a liberal and every political position that is not compatible with socialism. The crimes that are called hate seem to support the political left and reflect the needs of those on the left, far more than they reflect conservative values. There is a huge amount of support for abortion, but to defend the life of a fetus is akin to committing a hate crime as it fails to reflect the left's agenda. It seems odd that hate is only attached to certain crimes. Has anyone who set fire to a church ever been charged with a hate crime? Has anyone who attacked a Christian preacher been charged with a hate crime? Were the gays who were attempting to force Christian bakers to bake a gay wedding cake charged with a hate crime? It was not the wedding that was at issue, it was the decorations. Why would anyone try and force someone to provide a service they did not wish to provide? Would you feel comfortable eating a meal prepared by someone who hated you and your beliefs? Why is calling someone a racial slur a hate crime, but a mob of black youths attacking a lone white girl not a hate crime? Do Christians force atheists to prepare bread and wine for communion, but we are required to embrace and evangelize their pet belief systems up to and including dressing our children in sex-inappropriate clothing and medically inducing their bodies to mimic their play? Why do so many atheists feel it is a hate crime for Christians to teach the gospel but not hate to promote gender dysphoria and the sexual mutilation of children? What is hate in the context of a crime that the crime is not sufficient in itself? The government explains hate in this way. 1. Everyone who, by communicating statements in any public place, incites hatred against any identifiable group where such incitement is likely to lead to a breach of the peace is guilty of a hate crime. 2. Everyone who, by communicating statements, other than in private conversation, willfully promotes hatred against any identifiable group is guilty of a hate crime. There is no category of offense that is specifically a hate crime. The criminal code states that for police to lay a hate-motivated or bias-motivated criminal charge, two things must occur. A criminal offense must have occurred, e.g. an assault, damage to property, uttering threats, etc. Hate or bias toward a victim must have motivated the criminal offense, e.g. because of the victim's race, nationality, ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, etc. In other words, a hate crime is a crime committed to a protected group because of the accused bias towards the protected group. There is no statement to the effect that white people are immune from being victims of hate crimes, but the evidence is clear: all hate against whites is justified from a legal standpoint. A simple definition of a hate crime is an offense motivated by prejudice or bias. However, the kind of crime the definition covers depends on the definition of bias. One definition used is the following. A bias-motivated crime is a crime in which the offender is motivated by a characteristic of the victim that identifies the victim as a member of some group towards which the offender feels some animosity. Some jurisdictions prioritize the impact the act had on victim, others require the act be based solely upon the victim's race, religion, nationality, ethnic origin, sexual orientation, gender, or disability. Others require only it be a component of the motivation, the motive for which is based in whole or in part upon the victim's race, religion, nationality, ethnic origin, gender, disability, or sexual orientation. There is a problem on determining what part hate played in the crime. Proving the crime was motivated solely by hate makes hate crimes difficult to prove. Permitting hate to play only a supportive role opens up the possibility that any crime committed against an identified group will meet the criteria of a hate crime. The states have tried to require the hate component be substantial but not necessarily the primary influence, but not incidental either. This makes a subjective issue even more subjective if such a thing is possible. Bias is to be reported only if the investigation reveals sufficient objective facts to conclude that the offender's actions were motivated, in whole or in part, by bias. Ottawa Police Service, 1994. Needless to say, requiring hate to be the cause of the crime rather than a minor influence means fewer crimes can be reported as hate crimes. But nothing has been said about the groups that are potential victims of hate crimes. Are we to suppose no visible minority has ever committed a hate crime against a white person? Is interracial rape not a potential hate crime? Has a crime not been labeled a hate crime because the victim was white and the accused black? If a black man rapes a white man's sister and the white man kills the black rapist, is this a hate crime perpetuated against the black man or the white girl? Can the argument be made that had the rapist been white, the brother would not have killed the rapist? A black man can use racial slurs and not be charged with a hate crime, but the white man will be charged and vilified regardless of mediating circumstances. Why is the same language construed as hate speech in one case but not the other? What if the victim or the one engaging in the racial slurs were half-breeds? Can a person who is half-black use racial slurs? Can the person who is of mixed race be charged with hate crimes against a black person? The intent of hate crime legislation is to prevent anyone from acting out of hatred for certain groups. But why are they protected from being hatred? Let's imagine I argue that dandelions are ugly and an eyesore and I think they all ought to be destroyed. This is hate speech directed at dandelions. If George is seen uprooting dandelions, how responsible am I? To what degree is my speech responsible? If I tell George to buy a lottery ticket and he does, am I partly responsible for his winnings and therefore entitled to a portion of the win? At what point is an adult making up his own mind about what he will do, and to what degree is society and its actors responsible for the person's behavior? If I rant on and on about the evils of landlords, am I responsible for George not paying his rent and getting evicted? Is there a difference in speech in saying you support the freedom of Palestine from the river to the sea and in saying Israel must be destroyed? Hate speech can be positive or negative. To say whites have a right to Western countries and minority migration needs to be limited is to preach hate in the minds of many. But to say Africa is a black country and white migration and political influence must be restricted is glorified as an expression of black power. But this widespread bigotry of the law is well known. The law is after all nothing but the opinions of those with the power and position to issue their feelings as a regulation and enforce it. Hate crime legislation is not written by God, but by men with attitudes, priorities and agendas and prejudices of their own. The law, they say, is impartial. It makes it as illegal for the wealthy and privileged to sleep under bridges just as much as it prohibits the destitute. The hit man, armed robber and serial killer are no more permitted guns than the law-abiding farmer living on his farm isolated from the official help of a 911 call. And we know, the life of a serial killer intent on torturing and killing you and your family is as important and as protected as the life of the family targeted by this killer is. But murderers always seem less reliant on the state to protect them and their rights and what they deem to be their privilege. Is the imbalance in the justice system not a hate crime? Is the way the justice system favors a good outcome for the criminal not a hate crime? Hate crime legislation is designed to protect the innocent against acts that are directed against it solely because of incidental factors. The criminal acts perpetuated by antisocial bigots who despise the law and those who operate within it is a special kind of hate that needs to be identified and targeted. It is not enough to make it illegal to steal, because those who steal are not under the law in any meaningful sense of the word. They are Ishmaelites who hate everyone and who are hated by all or who ought to be hated by all. Being outside the law, they ought not to be under the law's protection. If they hate us, then we have every justification to hate them. The law needs to turn its hate towards those deserving of it and away from the law-abiding citizen.